Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. And my guest today is Dr. Ed Belbruno, mathematician and artist. As a mathematician, Ed's work at NASA led to a new way to do space travel using chaos theory and was instrumental in saving a Japanese lunar probe in the early 1990s. He has written two recent books on this work, the most recent being Fly Me to the Moon. Ed also is president of and owns his own scientific consulting company. And in contrast to that, or perhaps just seeming contrast to that, Ed is an accomplished, talented, prolific artist, having had shows abroad, as well as most recently at the Metropolitan Opera House. And he's here today to talk mostly about his life as an artist. So welcome.
Thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So and I know we're going to talk mostly about your art, but I don't want to bypass the book. So the book is Fly Me to the Moon.
Yes.
And can you just in a couple of sentences talk about it and where people can get it and why they would want to get it?
Okay, the book Fly Me to the Moon was just published by Princeton University Press, and they can find it on Amazon.com. And what it's about is the discovery I made back in the late 80s and early 90s, actually the late 80s, on how to use chaos theory to find new, cheap fuel ways to get to the moon. And although my theory was ridiculed at the time, and I was actually fired from my job at NASA out in California, the Jet Propulsion Lab, the place that brings you these Mars missions and these missions at Saturn. It's a very good, it's one of the premier NASA centers. My work back then was never heard of before. They felt it was ridiculous. It would never be applied to anything. And meanwhile, I had developed this on the computer, so I knew it worked. So I was let go from my job in January 1990, and the 2 months that I was finding myself a new job before I actually left there, I had the incredible opportunity that came out of the blue to rescue a Japanese lunar probe and get it to the moon. And it actually turned around my life overnight from the feeling of being fired, losing everything I had, to suddenly being totally vindicated. And a year to that day, in October 1991, this Japanese spacecraft arrived at the moon on this new way I found. So the book discusses the difficulties I went through at the time, the trials and tribulations, the success, and basically from the point of view of Princeton University, is what was the real discovery process? How does a scientist make a discovery? What was that aha moment that really made all this happen? And to show that the road to discovery is not always walking down a bed of roses. It couldn't have been more roller coaster, like a roller coaster.
That's really incredible, and how great to be vindicated and have an opportunity to succeed, and and then everything that came out of that. So so typically I think people think of mathematicians and mathematics as obscure, very concrete, deep thinking, not particularly, I wouldn't ever think of a mathematician as particularly expressed, but this is all my, stereotypical thinking. And then you have this fabulous art. How does that happen?
Well, it's interesting. I was born as an artist. I started doing oil paintings at 7 years old with no training. No one told me about it. I was a little kid with my mother one day walking in the downtown New London where I grew up, and I just spontaneously went to an art shop on my own and bought turpentine, oil paints, and a canvas and started painting. I just sort of knew how to do it. And by 11, I was producing paintings which today I can hang in major galleries. They really, one in particular really came out like a top of the line painting at 11. So it's in my blood, and I never had to work hard at it. I was offered to be taken on by an agent in New York, a major agent, when I was 18, and I actually turned that down because I was not ready for anything like that, and I was never trained for it, really. Now, of course, I would like to find such agents. But
But I have a question to ask you, because there are a whole lot of questions that can arise from that. Nature, nurture, born with, born to be. You look at some of the famous, musicians and composers. It seems like they came into the world with the talent almost like handed down to them.
Yeah.
And so here you are. I mean, at the age of 7, how do you know all this? I mean, for me, I immediately go, well, there's some previous or connection to something. And did it, and it seemed very natural to you. Was it shocking or surprising to your mother? Was she an artist?
No, she didn't know what to make of it. My mother really didn't know what to, I mean, here I'm a young kid, 8 years old, doing really paintings you could hang in major collections, and she didn't know what to do. I mean, she was never, I asked her later in life, Mom, why didn't you put me like in a major art school at that age? She goes, well, I didn't know what to do with this. But her relatives did, and they were just astounded. It was due to their enthusiasm that I knew I had something special. But if they if they were not enthusiastic, I just would have thought anybody could have done that.
Right.
But it's a natural talent. I could stand in front of a canvas now and do a painting in 3 hours. That would take many people, if they were doing it, maybe half a year to do. It just automatic. There's no process.
And have you ever had any training?
Yeah, I've had a little bit of training. In college, I had a little bit of training, but it wasn't necessary. As a person was training me, he realized as well as I did that I was well beyond that. But I have studied. I've studied nowadays with the internet, with all the books that have been available over the years. You know, I can go and just go to museums and check things out very carefully.
Yeah. So, you know, you talk about the book and like the path of discovery of something,
Yes.
and the art is a path of some kind of discovery.
Yes.
And I want to get back to that as a path, but the question is, how did you get to mathematics from this?
Well, what happened was I grew up in the 60s, and it was a time...
One of those.
One of those, yes. And I spent a lot of time in rock festivals, and I wasn't exactly a studious kind of person. And I could say much more about that, but I don't want to do this on this show. But when I went to college, I really was not ready for it. And the first semester, I had these grandiose notions I was going to take all these math, physics, all these heavy-duty courses. And I partied too much, ended up in the hospital, and had to recuperate for a while. Now, I was so scared by that experience, I said, if I don't get my act together, I'm never going to succeed. So as soon as I got out of the hospital and recuperated for a few months from my partying experiences, then I said, you know, I am going to study every single line of that calculus book, because I got a D the first semester I was there.
Now, but why math?
Math, because I grew up without too much positive reinforcement in my life, and I noticed that when I was solving math problems really fast, people were impressed by that. So it was a great way to get attention. So I said, oh, if I solve 10 math problems in 5 minutes, people are amazed by this, I get attention, let me keep doing that. So it was my way of just being recognized. And I sort of went down that path because of that. But what happened was I kept